In this section we will work on the piston cylinders, and we're going to start out with cutting the support pieces, and we need 12 medium weight chipboard circles that are 1 inch in diameter, and then we need 4 medium weight chipboard circles that are 1 1/4 inch in diameter, and for those I'm again using this set of mover and shaper dies. The smallest die is just about 1 1/4 inch, so for these 4 I could use that. These I just cut by hand. So then we want to mark for center in both the large ones and the small ones, and for 2 of the large ones we'll cut a hole, 2 of them will leave plain, and in all of the small ones we'll punch a hole. So I'm going to do that for all 12 of the small ones and 2 of the large ones, and then I'll be back. I have all my holes punched now, and for the small ones I've lined them up on this dowel, and if there's any irregularities that you're concerned about, you could just keep them together and take a file to them a little bit. And then once you've got them so that they're lined up, just in case your holes aren't punched exactly in the middle, I'm going to just take a red marker, and that way I'll know that this way, if I keep them oriented all with the marker up, I will have them, the holes will be oriented correctly in case they're not all in the right place. So, and also you can see here that I have my larger circles have turned to black, and I just took a marker and colored them. And so then this is a piece of the leftover from making the boiler. I've cut it 1 3/4 inches wide by 7 1/4 long, so 1 3/4 inches by 7 1/4, and that should give us enough to do both cylinders. Now when we make the cylinders we're only going to use 3 of these in each one. Oh, I don't think I said that I glued them together in sets of 2. But in order to measure, it'll be a lot easier to measure if we have more bulk around here. So we're just going to keep all of these on here for right now and do our measuring. So what I'm going to do is I've just separated them into groups of 3 far enough apart so I can support my chipboard as it comes around here. I'm keeping it pretty snug against that end, and then I'm just going to, with my pencil, make a tick mark on each end. Try not to lose my grip. You want to make sure these ends meet evenly. And then hopefully they line up similar to one of the, they're in a line coming across here, and mine are, and they are just, actually they're aligned right on one of the 1/8 inch scores. So I'm just going to simply take my scissors and cut that piece and check it out and make sure it's good before we use it as a template to cut the other one. That fits pretty well there. So I'm going to take this measurement and transfer it to this second piece. So now I have the inside support for each of my cylinders. So to attach this piece to our little rings here, I'm going to use a combination of wet glue and a strip of cardstock. I've cut this 1 inch wide. It has a 1 inch of score tape, and I'll just cut that to 1 3/4 inches. And go ahead and attach that on one end. And then give that a burnish. See if I can get these guys pretty much where I want them. And then we'll go ahead and run some glue along here. I'm going to make sure I'm lining them up on the ends. Then I can just wrap this around. Keep a wet wipe handy. Just checking to make sure that the end ones are flush with my piece of chipboard I'm wrapping around. Keep some good pressure on there. And come back around here to the beginning. Make that butt joint. And then secure that joining strip. Give that a burnish. Now, if your chipboard gets pushed in a little bit, just carefully take your craft knife, and if you push it at an angle, you'll be able to get a hold of it and bring it out so that it is flush with the end. And then we'll just let that dry and we'll do the other one. So now we're ready to cover our cylinders with some pattern paper, and I've cut 2 pieces that are 1 3/4 by 4 inches long. I've already started kind of training them to want to curve around the cylinder just by wrapping them around a little bottle here and giving it a little pressure. Now it's encouraged to want to go around the cylinder. And I put some good coverage of score tape on here. I'll just kind of peel back one end to get it started. And I'm just going to use one of these big pieces with a hole in it just to kind of help me get it aligned and get going. And I don't want to start right over my seam, so just start somewhere, other than the seam, and make sure it's staying on nice and straight. Kind of look at the edges here. Be careful when you put pressure on here, because remember there's only support here in the middle, so this is lightweight chipboard. You can't squash it too hard. And then just continue removing the backing and making sure you get it nice and even on those two ends. And roll around. And there should be enough here to overlap a little bit at the end. And I did ink that edge here before I started. So I'll burnish right here on these ends, but I'll be careful about burnishing anywhere else too strongly because of that lightweight chipboard underneath there. And then I'll repeat that for my other cylinder, of course. And then to finish off, I've cut some circles and using my same template, and I could have put these on, the paper on, and then cut these templates, but oh well, I didn't. So anyway, I backed them with some score tape. I'll just get those on, give them a burnish. And then for the ones that have the hole in them, we'll need to punch that hole once we get the circle on. So just line up. I like to hold the punch kind of upside down and let the punch kind of get into that hole. And then go ahead and ink these up. And we'll just use some wet glue to put these on. Now one end we're going to cover up the hole. Just get it centered on there. Turn it over to get that on there. Get that centered and let that set up, and then put the dowel in to put the other end on. So here I am putting my other end on. I'm just putting the dowel end in, and then I can put my glue on here. Make sure I stay away from my dowel. I'll take my dowel out once I get this placed. And then we can just let those sit up and dry. So I've cut my dowels to length for the cylinders. They are 4 inches long, and I've also used some distressed paint. This is antique bronze to paint them. And as you can see, I also have a piece of 1/8 inch dowel. This is actually a skewer. It doesn't matter as long as it's 1/8 inch. and I'm going to need that in the next section, so since I had my paint out, I just went ahead and painted that as well. So then we can glue our dowels into our cylinders. Make sure you get them seated all the way down inside of there. And then we'll just put these aside. Next, we'll make two small steam chests that sit above the cylinders on top of the front support. And all of the pieces are medium weight chipboard. They're listed in the cutting guide under steam chest, and we have for each one we'll have a top and a bottom. We'll have two long sides. We'll have three short sides, and in two of those we'll punch an 1/8 inch hole in the center, and then there's a little piece called the inside. So before we put these together, we want to take one of the pieces that we punched a hole in and trim probably just a hair more than a 1/16 of an inch off the bottom. And you might notice that I do have little directional arrows on these. I'll do one for each one. So, and we're doing this because we're going to inset this inside piece into the center of the bottom, and if we didn't trim off this 1/16 of an inch, there wouldn't be any room for it to fit. So let's put this together. We're going to take our long sides, and they go opposite each other, and the side that we did not trim off from the hole goes on the outside. So we're going to just put these together into a box, and the short sides fit inside of the long sides. And then this little inside piece fits on the inside. That's why it's called inside. And then we'll put our other long side on here. And then the piece that we did cut off a little bit from the bottom goes centered in the middle here. Make sure you keep the side up that we didn't trim off. And then we have our last side, and this is the side with the hole in it, and it fits right inside of there. So just go ahead and make sure everything is square and let that set up for a minute. So while my little boxes are setting up, I'm going to cut the paper that's going to wrap around them, and we need a piece that is a 1/2 inch tall by, I would say, 5.5 inches long, because it's 5 inches around here because each side is 1.25 inches, but we want to have a little extra for wrapping. And what I'm going to use is part of this border here. So I'm just going to make sure when I put my ruler down on it that I'm getting a piece that is centered. I can see my 1/4 inch line going right down the center of this. And then I need a piece that is 5.5 inches long, and so I'll just measure and cut that, and then I'll be back. So when we put our paper on the boxes, we want to make sure we kind of do it in a mirror image. We want the join to be on the inside. So let's pretend that our locomotive is coming right down here in the middle. So on this one, I'm going to put the join right here, And on this one, I'm going to put the join right there. And that'll help me remember when I'm doing this to make sure I start in the right place. So I'm just going to start, and one of my ends is kind of dark, so that's going to be the end I'm going to start with. And I'll just put it in the center of that side that I marked with an X. And then I'll just wrap it around. And then go ahead and give that a good burnish and ink the edges if you'd like to. I'm just kind of checking that my corners are nice and crisp as well. Okay, so I'll ink and then I'll repeat that process for the second one. And then to finish off on the sides, I've just got a good sized awl here that I can use to poke in my hole here and on both of them. We're going to use a 1/8 inch dowel to act like a pipe. So that's the sides, and next we'll turn our attention to the tops and bottoms. So then to cover the top and the bottom of the chest, I'm just going to cut some squares here. I think I've cut these about 2 1/4 inch square, so that'll give me enough to wrap around. So I'm just going to do a simple wrap. I want to try to reduce bulk at the corners, so miter your corners so that you don't have bulk at the corners, because what happens here is that one of these goes on the top and one goes on the bottom, so we want to keep them as flat as possible. I've just come back to tell you how I'm doing mine. Now you remember I said I want to have the least amount of bulk here that I can. You can see I've got some really good miters going on here. Now my corners aren't wrapped. They have, they're just kind of meeting there. And the way I accomplished that was, these are called perfect trim rulers, and I know a lot of folks have them. And I have to hold it the right way here. There, I can finally read it. No matter which, there's 2 different ones. They have different sizes on them, but I'm using the .0625 side, and either one of the rulers has that on it. So if you only have one, it will have that side. And then it just lines up. That one I've already cut, and it has a place here for you to line up your corner and then cut off the corners. And if you don't have something like this, you can use the 45-degree angles on your mat to help you, and just cut it a little bit, about the width of the chipboard away from the corner. We'll do the same kind of thing. And then just gently, I usually do these opposites and then kind of put my finger on the corner there a little bit. Just kind of, there's a little teeny bit of a wrapping that can occur if you just kind of put your thumbnail in there carefully. And then go ahead and give that some burnishing and some inking, and so that's how I'm getting my really flat wraps here. So I'll finish my other 2 and then I'll be back. So I have all my little tops and bottoms covered with decorative paper and inked the edges, and I just kind of looked at them because the paper I'm using is not all the same. That doesn't bother me, but I just want to choose which ones I want to have on the top, because so much more of that will show. Hardly any of the bottom pieces shows, as you can see here. So I've got these set so that here's the Locomotive would go in the middle. my joins are facing towards the locomotive and the holes are facing towards me. So the front of the locomotive would be here and the cab would be back here. So I have some writing on my paper, so I'm going to make sure on these top ones where you can see it that the writing is facing forward. And then for the bottom ones where you really can't read anything on there, I'm just going to take, if there's any edges that are, maybe there's been a little cracking or something like that going on, I'll just make sure they face towards the inside. So I'm just going to use some wet glue and put these little sandwiches together. And now that I have them put together, I can take two of our little 1/2-inch wood plugs that I have just used my Copic marker to paint black, and I'll glue them on the center of the top of the chest. And then I've also cut some of that 1/8 inch dowel that we painted when we were working on the cylinders. I've cut the pieces to 3 3/4, 3 3/4, and I'm not going to glue them in. I'm just going to stick them inside of the steam chest for now. So there are my completed steam chests. The dowels are in here, but they can freely turn, and we want them to freely turn, so if they don't, just enlarge your hole just a little bit so that they can. And that will complete them at this point.